In this video, we are going to go in more details about JSX. We'll try to look at the differences between JSX and HTML. Along with that, we'll also try to understand what are the potential or things that we can do with JSX. So JSX is a syntax extension to JavaScript. It is also very similar to any templating languages like EJS, Handlebars, or Pug. But the most important thing about JSX is it has the full power of JavaScript. But before going into that, let us try to understand how we started and where we are right now. So this is how you write static HTML. And this is how you write dynamic HTML. So if you want to create this structure using JavaScript, this is how you do it. But we figured out this is not very friendly and not easy to maintain. So we tried to fix it. And we understood there is one way of fixing it by creating your own abstraction. And then later on using the abstraction created by React known as React.createElement. And then later on we figured out why not use extension to convert something like this into React.createElement. And that is what JSX is. Using Babel, you convert JSX into React.createElement. And React.createElement dynamically creates the element. And that is what is happening here. So now if we try to compare JSX and HTML, they look very similar. And actually they are, but there are some small differences that we need to understand, and that is what we are going to take a look at right now. So there are small differences between HTML and JSX. The first one is in HTML you write class, but in JSX you should be writing class name. And the reason for this is because JSX wants to be close to DOM rather than HTML. Similarly, when you're using something for label, you use for, but in JSX you should be using HTML for. Here you have Textarea. So something is children right here, but when you're writing the same thing in JSX, you will have to write it in this way. Like Textarea is an element, it has a special attribute value, and that is where you pass the children that you want as value of Textarea. Let's just try to see this in action. So here we can see that we have an element that we have created known as h1, which doesn't have any class. If we want to add one, we can just say class name, and let's just add heading. Because we have added a class named heading in our CSS, and we have added CSS into our HTML. Similarly, when you want to create text area, you can do something like area is equal to text area is an element. You can just close it like this, and you can just pass a value that can be type your bio. And instead of h1, right now I'm just going to say text area. Save it, refresh it, and here you can see this is how it will look like. So we understood class for text area. Moving on to next. This is one of the major difference between HTML and JSX. Not all the elements in HTML can be self-closing, but every element in JSX can be self-closing. What do I mean? Say for example, when you create something like h1 in HTML, you do something like this. You have to open it and you have to close it. But in JSX, you don't have to. You can directly self-close something like this. You create a div and you have to close the div. But in JSX, you can directly open the div and close it in the same thing. So every element in JSX can be self-closed. An important thing is every element in JSX needs to be closed. So there are certain situations, think about it like this, you have input. So in HTML, you don't have to close input, it can remain open, but that is not possible in JSX, you will have to close it. Same is the case with image. And let's just look at one in action. So what if I want to add an image? So I'll just say image, and here we can just add any URL. Let's copy one image from here and paste it right here. Refresh it, and what we can see that image is visible here because we have added this element. But important thing to notice is image is not closing at all. But what if we move this thing down in JSX and we define another variable called image is equal to this, and here instead of text area, let's just pass image. Refresh it, And what we see is it's not showing anything. Look at the error. In error, we can see that unterminated JSX content. So it is throwing an error that this is an unterminated JSX content. You cannot have something like this. That was a valid HTML but not a valid JSX. So you have to close it. Now if you refresh it, you'll see the image right here. So these are some of the differences in HTML and JSX. Another thing that we need to understand about JSX is when you are putting the React element into DOM, you cannot have multiple children. Say for example, what if I need H1 and image at the same time? You must be thinking the simplest way would be, let's just go ahead, delete this part and put this code just next to each other. So if I just break this into 2 lines, this is how it will look like. So this is what we did. So we have a h1 variable and the value is h1 and image. What if I want to display h1 in our DOM? Refresh it. What will happen is it will throw an error. And if you read the error, it will say adjacent JSX element must be wrapped into enclosing tag. What it means is you cannot have multiple children returning from any element here. You need to have one parent. Do we have one parent here? No, we don't. So the way to make it one parent is you can just wrap it into a div. So we can do something like this. So now what is happening here is like we have wrapped these 2 children h1 and image into a parent div. If you refresh it here, you will see that it started working, right? So this is one of the way of fixing it. You cannot have multiple children in an element. You have to have one parent element. But because you have to wrap all the children into a div or something like that, there is a time that you are going to have so many divs. That is unnecessary, right? So here, when you look at the element, you'll see that we have div with ID of root. Inside that, we have one div. And inside that we have h1 and image. So it is also not very good because it is causing another problem, and that problem is like having too much of div everywhere. So the way to fix that is React has created a special element that is just a wrapper element. It's a special one. And in JSX, in React it is called React Fragment, but in JSX you can denote it in like just empty tab. So I'm just wrapping it into empty and it will work. Refresh it, and now when you look at div with ID root, you will not see any other div inside root. It's directly there, but using react.fragment, you can wrap multiple children and make it one parent. So this is the way to do that. Moving on to next, there's a lot of other things that we can do with JSX, and specifically when you combine it with JavaScript. Let's see what does it mean. Say for example, here we have JSX versus HTML. What if I want to use some kind of variable that we define it right here? So let's just define username is equal to area. And here I want to say a message saying hello area, and the value should come from username. So you must be thinking, let's just go ahead and say hello. But how can we use username here? So in JSX, whenever you want to use JavaScript, you just have to use curly brackets open and close. And inside that, you can write any kind of expression. Remember that you can only write expressions. So I want to write hello. Along with that, I want to add the name of username. So I'll just say username. Username is an expression. When you're adding it with hello, it will become hello area. And that is the magic of JSX. Along with that, say for example, you want it 2 times. So you can just say repeat 2 times. And you'll see hello area. Like here you can add any kind of function. Isn't it cool? Like you can just do so many things. Like say for example, what I can do is I can split each character. I'll get an array. Then I'll map over it. I'll get access to one character, and here I can say character dot to uppercase and return that. And at last, what I can do is I can just say go ahead and join it. I know you must be thinking we can directly do username.to uppercase. I know you can do that. I'm just trying to say that you can combine multiple methods to do something. So here I just use split, map, join, uppercase to make it uppercase. That is not the right way to do it, but I'm just saying you can do something like that. So now going forward, there are certain situations when we need to put some kind of condition. Like we can also do that in JSX because we can write any kind of expression. So think about it. Your username is Arya. What if I want to see if the username is Arya? I want to return different message than normal. Okay, so what I can do is I can go ahead and start using conditions, right? So I can just say, okay, if, but there is a problem. What is the problem? The problem is if is a statement. And what did I tell you earlier? You can only write expressions inside curly brackets. And that is very, very important. So here I'll just delete this. And I think you know how to put if condition, but in the form of expression. You got it right. It is ternary operator. So what we can say is whenever username is equal to Arya, condition it and return no one. Go ahead and return lot of interval. Let's refresh it. And what do we see here? Because username is Arya, what if I change it to John and refresh now? You'll see lot of interval. So that is the magic of JSX. In JSX, inside curly brackets, you can write any kind of expressions. In this way, we learned about the potential of different things you can do it in JSX. We also learned about the difference between JSX and HTML. And how can you put JavaScript inside JSX?